Guys, are you ready for the opening keynote of the summit? We are beyond thrilled to have the head of Asia Pacific Agenda and a member of the Executive Committee of World Economic Forum to present the summit's opening keynote. In his current role, Ju Ok Lee is in charge of the forum's institutional collaboration with governments and public sector stakeholders in the APAC region, as well as organizing the forum's flagship meeting in the region. In his keynote, you will learn about the region's challenges and opportunities for digital transformation, and also some of the insights from the forum's recently conducted survey on ASEAN's digital generation. In the second part of the keynote, Ju Ok will be joined by our very own Star Media Group's business editor for a fireside chat. Guys, please join me to welcome Ju Ok Lee of the World Economic Forum.
Good morning, selamat pagi from here in Geneva. My name is Ju Ok Lee. I'm the head of Asia Pacific for the World Economic Forum. I'd like to use this opportunity also to thank our organizers, the Star Media Group, for inviting me. I'll be sharing a very brief presentation and together with my brief thoughts on how the Fourth Industrial Revolution has evolved during the pandemic and how it can be leveraged to enable a better recovery for Malaysia and the broader region. So we're now 2 years into the pandemic, and from where I am sitting here in Geneva, Switzerland, some are actually saying that there may even be a fourth wave. So this has all been, very, very difficult for everyone to live through and to actually adapt. But I think in order to keep an eye on the light at the end of the tunnel, to focus our efforts towards rebuilding for the post-pandemic world, I think it is highly important that we try to understand what COVID-19 has induced in terms of change of mindset, in terms of behavior, and the overall societal context that we live in. As the International Organization for Public-Private Cooperation, the World Economic Forum has its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and operates across 7 different offices and also 15 different centers of Fourth Industrial Revolution all over the world. But more importantly, rather than an institution, we are known as a platform. The World Economic Forum annual meeting platform that many of you are familiar with in Davos clusters has actually seen the launch of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, more recently CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation back in 2017. And also since the beginning of the pandemic, we have launched the COVID Action Platform, where we have gathered more than 1,000 leading businesses together with international organizations and governments to discuss how best to respond to this devastating pandemic and how best we can actually coordinate our efforts across sectors to recover from this devastation. We have also engaged in activities in the region where we've convened leading businesses together with governments and regional organizations. And also here in ASEAN, we have launched the Regional Action Group for ASEAN back in April in 2020. And since we have been meeting and discussing what public-private collaborations there can be and there needs to be in response to this pandemic. And all of these interactions have lent important insights, spurred important innovations and initiatives that cut across different sectors. And I think one conclusion that we've come to is that COVID-19 has really had a fundamental change in terms of the way we interact, the way we go about our businesses, and overall the societal makeup has also significantly shifted due to the impact that the pandemic has had. I want to go a little bit deeper into one of the aspects of the changes that we've noticed, which is something that we have launched here at the World Economic Forum back in 2016 called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, characterized as fusing of the physical, digital, and biological worlds. Of course, having spent the last 18 to 24 months in an untapped environment, COVID-19 has really sort of catalyzed greater adoption and acceleration of what we call the fourth industrial revolution. It's not only that there has been a wider rollout of digital transformation. I think the change in mindset that what we have experienced over the past months has really also advanced the readiness for us to embrace and be ready for what may be entailed in terms of the future of jobs. Here at the forum, we have been looking at the interconnections between the elements that define the future of jobs. And I think what we are experiencing through remote work, through remote education and collaboration is that potential that we've been seeing before has actually come much closer due to the pandemic. It's not just been a positive change for digital transformation. We have also seen some of the fault lines that have been revealed through the impact of the pandemic, where it has become even more important to work towards an inclusive and sustainable digital future. And I'll hopefully also address some of those issues later on in this presentation. Back in 2017, the World Economic Forum, in partnership with one of the leading digital and electronic players here in ASEAN, Sea Limited, we've been running a series of surveys, mainly targeting the youth in ASEAN, to have a pulse into what they're thinking, what their aspirations are, and also given that ASEAN's digital transformation was actually one of the fastest and the most prominent in the world, we wanted to have a close view into the primary users of this online space. This year, in 2021, we have rebranded the ASEAN Youth Report into the ASEAN Digital Generation Report, further expanding the scope of responses from not just the youth, but also the broader online users. We've gathered more than 86,000 responses from across 6 different ASEAN countries. And what it does, I think, for us is really to have a reading into what people have gone through, how people have coped and adapted to the new context that was provided by the pandemic, and what kind of a role digital transformation and further adoption of digital technologies has actually done to their lives, to their livelihoods. So one thing that we've seen from the results of this year's survey is that participants of the survey really predicted they have not only seen some of the negative impact, but also positive changes that will come about, including a future with a better healthcare, a greener, and also a more digitalized future. What is important for us is that more than 85% of the respondents considered digitalization as being a key factor towards economic recovery. And this was common across all of the different countries where respondents resided in. And also, this was more apparent in some of the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and their owners that had responded to the survey. When asked to identify some of the factors preventing further digital adoption, more than half of the respondents actually cited the lack of affordable and quality internet. There were cases complaining about some of the gaps in terms of digital skills, and also some of the funding and financing that was necessary for them to take their businesses into a more sort of digitalized environment. However, one silver lining that we've seen is that during the pandemic, there has been a significant transfer of skills between different generations. And we often cite that there is a generational divide when it comes to digital transformation. However, we have seen quite a significant teaching and learning between different generations that commonly had to experience what the pandemic has brought about. I want to talk a little bit about just in general what the role of digital transformation is, and how it can be leveraged to advance societal progress. So one clear dimension is in terms of boosting competitiveness. The World Economic Forum has been known also for the Global Competitiveness Report that we launch every year. And last year, we launched a special edition that looks into how countries are performing and also how they're performing in terms of the recovery from this pandemic. And one thing that we have tried to emphasize is the role of digital technology, the role of digital adoption for many of the countries, and how it has also a positive impact towards boosting competitiveness. Hopefully, I'll be able to go into more depth in the Q&A and also in the fireside chat as to what we mean by competitiveness and the impact of digital transformation towards competitiveness. But it is very clear that the level of business sophistication, the strength of innovation-related factors are actually becoming more and more influential in driving competitiveness and how we benchmark different countries. Digital transformation, in our view, also has a significant impact in terms of bringing countries that are neighboring or that are far away closer together. We have seen through the emphasis that are laid out in the Bandasari Begawan roadmap for ASEAN, how digital transformation is being positioned as a central initiative in a way to really realize the vision of ASEAN single market, how all the other commitments that have been made by the ASEAN member states will be advancing the digital integration and also, more importantly, the physical integration through digital connections for the ASEAN region. And one last thing I wanted to mention in terms of the positive impact of digital transformations is the purpose-driven innovation aspect. The two examples I want to share with you is one very recently in Glasgow, President Biden of the United States, through his special envoy, John Kerry, has launched together with the forum what we call the First Movers Coalition. It is a group of very large companies that have made pledges to use their purchasing power to create a market for green technologies, emission reducing technologies, and also to send a very clear market signal that there is a clear market for these innovations that are geared towards protecting our planet. The other example that I want to share with you is Uplink. So we not only work with large businesses, but also with small but very innovative startups, entrepreneurs that we have tried to crowdsource innovations from to address some of the global challenges that we have. So we have designed specific challenges, whether it's in just energy transitions or it's in marine debris reductions. All of these innovators have actually come together to submit their ideas. And we have used the Uplink platform to connect them with governments, with larger businesses that have been scouting in a way for these ideas, and also with other like-minded innovators so that they can scale up the ideas that they have and also see much greater impact. Now, bringing the attention back to Malaysia, we know that the government has recently launched the National Fourth Industrial Revolution policy that lays out the strategic directions for government policies and action plans related to emerging technologies. There are 4 different thrusts or policy focuses looking at human capital development, infrastructure improvement, and technology adoption, and so on. And underneath these thrusts, there are 16 different strategies and also a number of national initiatives. We highly recognize the value of these policies sort of gearing towards boosting national competitiveness. We think that the roadmap that Malaysia has laid out for itself will enhance the local capabilities and also embrace some of the environmental, sustainability targets that the country has. And all in all, I think, having such a blueprint enables the country, the government and businesses, then on the broader society to actually work together to fully leveraging the fourth industrial revolution, not just for the country's overall progress, but also in response to some of the challenges that the pandemic has brought about. So I want to close this presentation by leaving some thoughts as to how best to leverage fourth industrial revolution within the context of Malaysia as businesses and government and civil society work together towards a inclusive and sustainable recovery. So one thing that we must not lose sight on is the digital divide. As the fourth industrial revolution further evolves, there is a risk that it may leave some people behind, some sectors behind, and I think we cannot afford to lose sight of that. And one sort of clear way to try and protect and ensure that all of society benefits from this digital transformation is by investing in digital infrastructure, and also investing in the human capital development, so that all the different generations, all the different sectors equally benefit in this whole of society transformation. From the forum side, we have launched what we call the Edison Alliance, working with leading companies and also governments from the region, addressing where there is the widest gap in terms of connectivity, and to try and bring together all the stakeholders towards widening access to more than 1 billion people over the next 5 years. In addition to addressing the connectivity issue, I think we have to also focus on what kind of a market further digital transformation creates for Malaysia and for the region. And here again, I want to bring our attention back to some of the potential that further digital transformation, further digital connectivity brings towards the region. We have seen ASEAN member states come together to agree on ASEAN's e-commerce agreement. There is the also critical ASEAN single window that will hopefully act as a catalyst for the region to really realize its ambitions towards becoming a single market. And I think Malaysia has both a critical role in advancing this, as well as critical opportunities for itself in seeing a much wider and also much more integrated market within ASEAN. And finally, what I do want to emphasize is the role of public-private collaboration. Cooperative ecosystems within which governments incentivizes investments in research and development, and businesses can actually take risks by pursuing new approaches. We know that with digital transformation, there will not only be opportunities, but also risks in terms of data security, also privacy issues, and these cannot be solved with just one sector's efforts alone. So therefore, in trying to bring together stakeholders to address these complicated challenges and also fully reap the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution, the forum has launched and partnered with governments all around the world to create a network of centers for the fourth industrial revolution that look into some of the technology governance issues with these emerging technologies, and also what are opportunities for each of the governments to try and set standards and create markets in a way that these countries can actually act as a pioneer to advance across the different territories. So these are some of the recommendations, if you will, that the World Economic Forum would like to bring towards the attention for everyone. And I look forward to discussing further during the fireside chat with Jack Viv. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, I hope that you enjoyed that keynote speech by Ju Ok, but we have more for you. I'd now like to bring on the business editor of The Star for a fireside chat with Ju Ok. Jagdev Singh Sidhu has been covering various issues, events and companies under The Star for over 26 years. So, over to you, Jagdev.
Okay, thank you very much, York. It was an enlightening presentation. I think the audience will definitely be enthralled by what you had to present, especially in the much changing world that we are in today. You've got the pandemic, which has created a lot of, I suppose, concerns, operational inefficiencies, and at the same time, opportunity. You've also created, the pandemic has also created different pace of adoption when it comes to digitalization and also gearing up for industrial revolution 4.0. So in all of that, I think what you have tried to say is that there's going to be differences in terms of how things progress from here. So my question would be, will the adoption of IR4 in the aftermath of COVID-19 widen the divide between rich and poor countries? Because the pandemic has created much chaos. So will the adoption of IR4 widen a divide that's already seeing a rift parting in both different directions?
Thank you very much, Jagdeep, for having me, and also it's great to have this discussion with you. I think to your question, unfortunately, the answer is yes. I mean, from what we are seeing, not just in digital transformation, but throughout the pandemic, how income gaps, how the wealth gap between countries and within countries have affected response and recovery efforts. We are unfortunately seeing the risk of a widening gap, especially as digital transformation further rolls out. But that's also the reason why we need to really emphasize the inclusion aspect as we go towards further digital adoption, as we look towards further rollout and navigation of, within the fourth industrial revolution. Because if there's one thing that we've learned from the pandemic, it's that, unless the whole of society is actually part of this joint response and joint transformation, we are going to see much sort of greater impact in the aftermath. And it's not just from a pandemic response, but also in terms of reaping some of the benefits that digital transformation will bring. In the report that I earlier cited, the ASEAN's Digital Generation Report, we have noticed something that we have later called a flywheel effect. So the more digitalized you are and more parts of your businesses that are digitalized, you will actually be more keen to further digitalize and also invest more in terms of greater digital adoption. What that means also in converse is that, if you do not have the initial motivation or the initial tools to really embrace this digital transformation, then you will be left out. And I think, all the indicators that we have seen in terms of the positive impact towards resilience, the minimizing of, economic impact for those that are digitalized in terms of their business operations, we do not want, this further digital transformation wave to create winners and losers, and for societies to actually see that gap widening. So I think we need to work extra hard. It is very difficult. One of the negative legacies from the pandemic is that we have seen less cooperation between countries, or not more. So we have challenges ahead of us, but we know what the consequences will be unless we work more closely together between the global north and south, between developing and developed countries. And that's the future that we have to work towards.
All right. I like the point you made on inclusiveness, but, which brings me to the next question. And given that there's a great need for countries and policymakers to embrace inclusiveness, how can countries in ASEAN capitalize on making the leap in Industrial Revolution 4.0 when there are gaps in terms of human capital and also funding requirements? I think when you start to look at the skill level of human capital at different parts of the world, it varies significantly. and also the funding that is required to embrace and equip companies and governments towards the digital world is also going to be another impediment given the cost that has been spent in terms of combating the pandemic.
You're absolutely right. I think, we are not seeing a complete level playing field, not just between ASEAN and the rest of the world, but also even within ASEAN. And there is considerable work that has to be done to ensure that the basic foundations are laid for further digital transformation and fourth industrial revolution to really take effect. But that's also the reason why we are really emphasizing the importance of public-private collaboration. I think there is a clear role that governments have to play, whether it's in investing in infrastructure, laying out the right policies, but also there is a space where private sector can really play an important role in terms of unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit to conduct experiments and positive transformations that the private sector can have towards these sectors. But the two sectors must really work together. And another important thing that that allows for greater public-private collaboration to bridge these gaps is making the goal very, very clear. What the opportunities are for ASEAN, for individual countries within the region, if there is a further rollout of digital transformation, if the region fully embraces the fourth industrial revolution, what kind of benefits can the region look forward to? I think that's also one of the key aspects of further injecting enthusiasm and also attracting foreign investments towards the region. I think so far ASEAN has really successfully embraced the fourth industrial revolution. ASEAN's digital economy, I think, is second to none in terms of the rate of growth. But I think we can do better in terms of getting that message out that ASEAN really has a very bright potential towards the end of this fourth industrial revolution drive. And I think that's one of the answers towards closing that gap that currently ASEAN sees for itself.
Right. But the thing is, we all know that we are experiencing the pace and adoption of digitalization in one way or the other. I think for older people like me, we never really made purchases online. That's quite commonplace these days. And I think even governments have rolled out all sorts of e-commerce or digitalized services in order to have less contact and with the populace at large, and to prevent the spread of a pandemic. We still trying to get under control. But the thing now is that we know that there's an urgent need for the fourth industrial revolution, because it's going to create untold benefits given what we have seen from the previous three. And how much will the digitalization and IR4 influence countries' competitiveness going forward? Because in the end, it's all about how competitive you are against your peers, and how can digitalization help towards improving the competitiveness of countries, especially in Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Jack, for that question. So one sort of perspective that I can share is based on the forum's global competitiveness report and the global competitiveness index. The index itself has a very long history, but it's also not a very static model. We have continuously evolved how we measure competitiveness, and also in terms of adding new components, dimensions, and adjusting the weight of how these different dimensions impact one another. Most recently, even before the pandemic, we've significantly increased the emphasis on digital tools, digital competencies, and how they impact a country's competitiveness. And the reason why is because there are both direct ways and also indirect ways in how a country adopts digital transformation will later impact its competitiveness. I mean, the direct Ways, of course, are through the quality of infrastructure, the scale of innovation that you see within a country, and how that's also impacting other businesses as well. But also indirectly, the more a country is advanced in terms of digital adoption, typically you see much more sort of transparency, confidence, and trust into its institutions. And all of these factors, I think, are critical towards advancing one's competitiveness. So we will see a much stronger emphasis of the impact of fourth industrial revolution, the impact of how a country embraces and plans towards embracing fourth industrial revolution, and how countries are measured against one another in terms of the benchmark. So that is also one of the many different reasons why governments, private sector should work towards greater adoption and also a more inclusive and sustainable adoption of fourth industrial revolution. But we are clearly seeing that the signals are there. The causality, I think, between one another is certainly there as well. And we will see even more of an emphasis as we go along.
All right, which brings me to the next question I have, which you touched on the role of government and private sector in terms of adopting digitalization and fourth industrial revolution. But there was a pace that they were going on prior to the pandemic, and now that the pandemic has hit, the pace of adoption is going to be affected and changed. And I would tend to think it's going to be slightly more sluggish than what it used to be. How can companies and governments, policymakers and boardrooms overcome these challenges going forward? And how urgent is it for them to do so in a very timely and fast manner?
We actually have, as an international organization that really specifies in terms of public-private collaboration, the interaction between sectors, what we've noticed during the pandemic is this drastic change in terms of the role of governments, the role of state, with massive injections of funds into COVID recovery and response. I think it has also fundamentally changed how government and other sectors work together. After the pandemic, especially when it comes to digital transformation, I think this is one area in which public-private collaboration needs to also evolve considerably. In the past, we have seen the sort of typical relationship where governments try to define the problem and also the solution, and then retrospectively invite private sector to either adopt some of the solutions that they have devised for them, or in some cases, asked to take on some of the burden sharing, whether it's in initial investments or in terms of sort of rollout of some of these initiatives. I think private sector has as much of a responsibility in terms of the solution, but also in devising some of the assessment of the problem as well. Because the fourth industrial revolution, as it evolves, will impact not just a very small sector, but a wider sector of society, and also the challenges that will come about will be much more complicated for any one sector to deal with alone. So we are actively encouraging that private sector also take a seat at the table when governments determine how a nation will rebuild, especially when it comes to adoption of digital transformations, digital technologies, and therefore also take on more responsibility in terms of how it's rolled out. One sort of example that we can give you in terms of what I've also shared earlier in the presentation is the Edison Alliance. It's not just governments and international financial institutions pledging investment for expanding access. I think the way that we're trying to approach is what are the clear value chains that are involved in enhancing digital connectivity across those critical areas, whether it's healthcare, education, and really seeing who are the players that are involved and who can benefit from further expansion of digital connectivity in those areas. I think we can come up with much more creative and also effective solutions. So that's one model in which we think public-private collaboration should evolve in the post-pandemic world. And hopefully that can also have a positive impact towards other sectors and other initiatives as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Jewok, for your insight on a very compelling topic for governments and companies going forward from here. Everybody knows the need to embrace change. The question is, how are we going to attain it, and how are you going to deal with it? We look forward. I mean, your insights have been quite valuable towards understanding some of the issues at hand, and I do look forward to following what more that you can have and shed light in terms of what people need to do moving forward from here. Thank you very much, Jewok, for your time.
Thank you, Jagdev. It was a pleasure.
Hey guys, I hope you have enjoyed the opening keynote. Thank you so much, Jewok, for the insightful sharing. And also thank you, Jagdev, for moderating the fireside chat with Jewok.